My name is William, and I'm about to tell you a story that will chill you to your very core. A tale of terror, survival, and the beast that stalks the shadowy forests of Alabama. I never believed in monsters, not really. Sure, I enjoyed a good horror movie now and then, but I always knew it was just fiction. That is, until that fateful night when everything I thought I knew about the world came crashing down around me. It all began on a crisp autumn evening. I had just turned 29, and to celebrate, I decided to take a solo camping trip in the Talladega National Forest. I've always been an outdoorsy type, and the idea of spending a few days alone in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of city life, seemed like the perfect way to mark another year of life. As I drove down the winding roads leading into the heart of the forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mixed with a tinge of apprehension. The trees loomed tall and ancient on either side of the road, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, casting eerie shadows in the fading light. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to pre-trip jitters and too many horror movies. I arrived at my campsite just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The spot I had chosen was secluded, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and old-growth hardwoods. As I set up my tent and prepared a small fire, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a shiver down my spine. But I told myself it was just the local wildlife, curious about their new visitor. As night fell, I sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows and enjoying the peacefulness of the forest. The stars twinkled brightly overhead, unobscured by city lights. It was beautiful, serene, and for a moment I forgot about my earlier unease. That is, until I heard it, a long, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. My blood ran cold. Wolves in Alabama? That couldn't be right. I knew there were coyotes in the area, but this sound was different, deeper, more guttural, and somehow wrong. It sounded almost human, yet not quite. I told myself it was probably just some drunk campers playing a prank, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I decided to turn in early, hoping that sleep would calm my nerves. As I zipped up my tent and snuggled into my sleeping bag, I could hear the forest come alive with nighttime sounds. The hoot of an owl, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But underneath it all was an unsettling silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, part human, part animal, filled with rage and hunger. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining my ears to hear more. The forest had gone deathly quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. And then I heard it, the sound of heavy footsteps, moving slowly but deliberately through the underbrush. They were coming closer. I held my breath, hoping against hope that whatever was out there would pass me by. But the footsteps kept coming, closer and closer, until they stopped right outside my tent. I could hear heavy breathing, like a large animal panting after a hunt. And then, to my horror, I saw a shadow fall across the side of my tent. A massive, hunched figure that was definitely not human. With trembling hands, I reached for my flashlight. Part of me didn't want to see what was out there, but I knew I had to. As I flicked on the light, I heard a low growl that made every hair on my body stand on end. Slowly, I turned the beam towards the shadow. What I saw in that moment will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a wolf, but not like any wolf I had ever seen. It stood on its hind legs, towering over my tent at easily 8 feet tall. Its body was a mass of corded muscle covered in thick, matted fur. But it was the face that truly terrified me. It was a nightmarish blend of wolf and human, with an elongated snout full of razor-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed with an unnatural amber light. Those eyes, they weren't the eyes of an animal. There was intelligence there, and a hunger that went beyond mere predatory instinct. For a moment we stared at each other, the beast and I separated only by the thin fabric of my tent. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to breathe. And then with a roar that shook me to my very soul, the creature attacked. Claws ripped through the tent like it was tissue paper. I scrambled backwards, my mind blank with terror, operating on pure survival instinct. I managed to grab my hunting knife, a gift from my father that I had brought along more for show than anything else. Just as the beast burst into the tent, the stench hit me first, a nauseating mix of wet dog, rotting meat, and something else, something unnatural. Then came the heat of its breath as it lunged for me. I lashed out blindly with the knife, feeling it connect with flesh. The creature howled in pain and rage, rearing back. In that split second, I saw my chance. I bolted from the shredded remains of my tent, running faster than I ever had in my life. Behind me, I could hear the monster recovering, its howl of rage turning into the sound of pursuit. I ran through the dark forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. The sound of the creature crashing through the underbrush behind me spurred me on, terror lending speed to my feet. But I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. It was faster, stronger, and knew these woods far better than I did. I needed a plan, and fast. As I ran, my mind raced, trying to remember anything I had ever read or seen about werewolves. Silver bullets? I didn't have any. Wolfsbane? I wouldn't know what it looked like, even if I had time to stop and pick flowers. Then I remembered. Water. In many legends, werewolves couldn't cross running water. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I strained my ears, trying to hear over the sound of my own ragged breathing and pounding heart. There, faintly but growing louder, the sound of rushing water. I changed direction, heading towards the sound. The beast behind me roared in frustration, sensing that its prey was trying to escape. I could hear it getting closer, its hot breath practically on the back of my neck. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I burst through a line of trees and saw it. A wide, fast-flowing river, its waters black in the moonlight. Without hesitation, I leaped. The shock of the cold water drove the breath from my lungs, but I forced myself to swim, fighting against the current. Behind me, I heard a splash. The creature had jumped in after me. I swam with everything I had, my muscles screaming in protest. The current was strong, threatening to pull me under, but fear of what was behind me kept me going. I chanced to look back and saw the werewolf thrashing in the water, howling in fury. It seemed the legends were partly true. While the water didn't stop it completely, it was clearly struggling far more than any normal wolf would. The river carried me swiftly downstream, away from the monster. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I managed to drag myself onto the opposite bank, coughing and gasping for air. I looked back across the river, my heart in my throat. There on the other side stood the werewolf. It paced back and forth along the bank, those terrifying eyes fixed on me. But it didn't attempt to cross again. Instead, it threw back its head and let out a howl that echoed through the night. A howl that sounded almost human, a promise that this wasn't over. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. Soaked, exhausted, and still gripped by fear, I stumbled away from the river and into the unknown depths of the forest. The rest of that night was a blur of terror and exhaustion. I wandered through the dark woods, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment the werewolf would leap out at me. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally stumbled upon a dirt road. I followed it, my feet bleeding and my body on the verge of collapse, until I reached a small gas station. The attendant looked at me like I was crazy when I burst in, babbling about werewolves and begging to use the phone. Looking back, I can't blame him. I must have been quite a sight. Soaking wet, covered in cuts and bruises, with a wild look in my eyes. I called the police, but even as I was dialing, I knew they wouldn't believe me. Who would? A werewolf in Alabama? It sounded insane even to my own ears. So I lied. I told them I had been attacked by a large wolf or maybe a bear, that I had gotten lost in the woods while camping. They sent out a search party, but of course, they found nothing. No giant wolf tracks, no shredded tent, nothing to corroborate my story. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by fear and isolation in the woods. But deep down, I knew the truth. The terror I had felt was too real, the memory of those glowing eyes too vivid to be a dream. I became obsessed with researching werewolf lore, trying to make sense of what had happened to me. I scoured the internet for similar stories, for any hint that I wasn't alone in what I had experienced. And slowly I began to uncover a terrifying truth. There were other stories, whispered tales of beastmen stalking the forests of the South. Most were dismissed as campfire tales or the ramblings of drunk hunters. But there were enough similarities, enough details that matched my own experience to convince me that I wasn't crazy. I learned of an old Cherokee legend about skinwalkers in the Appalachian Mountains. I found accounts of early Spanish explorers writing about wolfmen in the Alabama wilderness. And most chillingly, I discovered a pattern of disappearances in the Talladega National Forest, stretching back decades. Lone hikers and campers who vanished without a trace. As I dug deeper, I began to piece together a horrifying picture. The creature I had encountered wasn't just a random monster, it was something ancient, something that had been stalking these woods for centuries. And worse, I began to suspect it wasn't alone. There were reports of similar creatures in other parts of the country, the Beast of Bray Road in Wisconsin, the Dogman of Michigan. Were they all connected? Part of some hidden society of werewolves living among us? The more I learned, the more questions I had, and the more I realized how little we truly know about the world we live in. But knowledge, while empowering, also brought new fears. If these creatures were real, if they had been living and hunting alongside humans for centuries, how had they remained hidden for so long? The implications were terrifying. It suggested a level of intelligence and organization that went far beyond mere animals. These weren't just mindless beasts, but thinking, planning predators. And then came the night terrors. Almost every night, I would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the echo of a howl ringing in my ears. In my dreams, I was back in those dark woods, running for my life. Sometimes I would dream of the werewolf catching me, feeling its claws tear into my flesh. Other times, the dreams were even worse. I would see my own reflection, watching in horror as my face elongated into a snout, as fur sprouted from my skin. I became a shell of my former self. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I jumped at every shadow, flinched at every dog bark. My friends and family were worried, but how could I explain to them what was really going on? They would think I was crazy. Hell, sometimes I thought I was crazy. But then came the full moon, 1 month after my encounter in the woods. As the sun set and the moon rose, fat and yellow in the sky, I felt a strange restlessness come over me. My skin felt too tight, my senses seemed sharper. And there, at the edge of my hearing, I could swear I heard a howl. Panic gripped me. Had the bite of the werewolf infected me? Was I about to transform, to become the very thing that had terrorized me? I locked myself in my bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, waiting for the change to come. But it never did. As the night wore on, the feeling of restlessness faded. By morning, I was exhausted but still human, yet the experience left me shaken. Even if I hadn't transformed, something had changed within me. I could feel it, a wildness lurking just beneath the surface of my skin. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. I went to therapy, telling my therapist a sanitized version of events, that I had a traumatic experience while camping, that I was struggling with anxiety and PTSD. It helped to a degree. I learned coping mechanisms, ways to ground myself when the panic and fear threatened to overwhelm me. But I knew I could never truly move on, never forget what I had seen. The knowledge of what was out there, hiding in the shadows of our world, had fundamentally changed me. I couldn't go back to my old life, couldn't pretend that the world was the safe, understandable place I had once believed it to be. So I made a decision. If I couldn't forget, then I would fight. I began training, martial arts, wilderness survival, marksmanship. I don't know if silver bullets are really effective against werewolves, but I learned to make them anyway. I stocked up on wolfsbane and other herbs mentioned in old legends. I also started reaching out to others who had similar experiences. Slowly, cautiously, I built a network of believers, people who had encountered things that couldn't be explained, who had brushed up against the supernatural and lived to tell the tale. Together, we shared information, supported each other, and prepared for the day when we might have to face these creatures again. But even as I armed myself with knowledge and skills, I knew the truth. I was forever changed by what had happened in those woods. Every full moon, I feel that same restlessness, that same wild energy coursing through my veins. I may not transform into a wolf, but something of the wolf now lives within me, and sometimes in the dead of night, when the moon is full and the wind carries the sound of a distant howl, I feel an answering call rise up within me. In those moments, I'm torn between terror and a strange, primal exhilaration. I know that someday, somehow, I'll find myself back in those dark woods, face to face with the werewolf once again. But this time, I'll be ready. As I sit here, writing this account of my experience, I can't help but wonder about the future. What will happen the next time I encounter the werewolf? Will my preparations be enough? Or am I fooling myself thinking I can stand against something so ancient and powerful? And what about the other creatures that might be out there, hiding in the shadows of our world? I don't have answers to these questions. All I know is that I can never go back to the person I was before that night in the Talladega National Forest. The world is a darker, more dangerous place than I ever imagined, but it's also more wondrous and mysterious. There are things out there beyond our understanding, creatures that defy our neat categories of possible and impossible. To those of you reading this, I have a warning and a plea. Be careful out there. The wilderness is beautiful, but it's also home to things we can scarcely imagine. If you find yourself alone in the woods and hear a howl that raises the hair on the back of your neck, trust your instincts. Run, hide, do whatever you need to do to survive. But also keep your eyes open. Look for the signs that most people miss. There's a hidden world all around us, and once you start to see it, you can never unsee it. It's terrifying, yes, but it's also incredible. We are not alone in this world, not by a long shot. And if you've had an experience like mine, if you've encountered something that you can't explain, know that you're not crazy, you're not alone. There are others out there like you, like me. Find us, join us. Together we can uncover the truth about the creatures that stalk the night. As for me, I know my story isn't over. The werewolf is still out there, somewhere in the dark forests of Alabama. Maybe it's hunting other unsuspecting campers. Maybe it's watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Or maybe, just maybe, it's struggling with its own nature, trapped between the human and animal worlds. Whatever the case, I'll be ready. Every full moon, I stand at my window, looking out at the silvery landscape, my hand on the knife I now always carry, the same knife that drew the werewolf's blood on that fateful night, and I wonder, not for the first time, if it's looking back at me. The Werewolf of Alabama changed my life forever. It opened my eyes to a world I never knew existed, and while I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone, I can't help but feel that, in some strange way, I'm now more alive than I've ever been. Every day is a gift, every moment precious, because I know firsthand how quickly it can all be taken away. So if you're reading this, remember my story. Remember that the world is stranger and more dangerous than you can imagine, but also remember that we humans are stronger than we know. We can face the darkness, we can survive the impossible, and who knows? Maybe one day we'll uncover all the secrets that the night keeps hidden. Until then, I'll be here, watching, waiting, and listening for the howl of the werewolf that stalks the southern wilds.